interesting in broadcasting. That does not allow me to change the slides for reasons I do not understand.
Oh, it doesn't?
We'll be coming around with their answer. Here's not one.
No time.
Yeah. For a while, they were telling me Chicago here at the Red Sox game, who saw. You could imagine what people did when the goose stand came. Bostonians were always a rowdy lot.
Any difference?
No. We do it this way? No.
All right, let me undo what I had done.
By sea, so it's 4 hours to do what they expected to do in 1 hour. And as you notice by home, if you live 3 miles from here, try to find a friend to stay with over the next bit. I'm gonna do the long roll of the drums in breaks. And most of the men just went to the tavern next door. And I don't necessarily need to drink. Tavern is where you get a bite, a tavern is where you gather to talk. A tavern was the place where you could get coffee or tea. You could do what you needed to do. But it's literally across from the town common. You'll see pictures of it as I slide. This is it, Buckman's Tavern at night. Buckman's was the largest of Lexington's 8 taverns for 800 characters. Tell you something about the role of the tavern within a community. And so they waited. And then it was just about 4:30 in the morning when a frantic rider, we've been sending riders up every few minutes to see what was happening. A frantic rider arrives with the news, they are just down the road. You know, think about it, you've been out since 1 o'clock in the morning, racing maybe 2-3 miles to Lexington Common. You waited there for an hour, freezing your bones. Finally, you got inside somewhere warm, and then just about the time you're beginning to nod off, bam, they're actually here, way beyond schedule, but they are here. Estimates were that it may be as many as 100. That's interesting. William Diamond was a newbie in Lexington. He was a Bostonian, 19 years old or 15 years old, depending upon which historian you ask. All I know is my junior high school was named for him. William Diamond Junior High. You go to Diamond, I sure go. And that drum was brought out, the one roll was sounded. Lexington's waiting Minutemen responded. And so now they're on the common again. It's just growing light in the east. And if you listen terribly carefully, you can hear the tread. Marching troops in the gravel road coming from Boston. And these are the best trained troops in the world. Who largely have never seen any combat except for their officers. They've been stuck in Boston for months. The whorehouses are ratty, taverns closed. The town is not doing well because it's cut off to all trade. And Bostonians, if they don't like some of the next people in the world, guys don't say the wrong thing when you buy a coffee and club, and you'll find out what a Bostonian is like. These are the guys that are on the march, having put up with that, and they are marching towards Lexington Common, where in theory, the embattled farmers. Well, actually, embattled farmers, well, what do you have to be in Lexington? You might run a tavern, you might be a lawyer, you might be a tinsmith, you might be a leathersmith, you could be any kind of tradesman. You might be a small farmer, probably raise small amounts of livestock or what we would call truck farming to bring those things into the Boston market. Terribly hard to get in Boston Neck with the British troops, and they would search your wagon. And almost all of these people found the British in Boston intensely annoying. But they had also been called to arms by the provincial Congress all the way back in October, 6 months earlier. And the provincial Congress decided that they would simply take over the militia in essence. And there were going to be these specially ready, well-trained, better paid in some cases, if you could get a legal town, meaning paid troops that would be called Minutemen. Lexington did not quite meet the standard, so they were not technically Minutemen, or they still call themselves that to this day. They were alarmists, which meant they were the most ready of their militia company. And so that long roll of the drum is going to bring a little over 70 of them. Probably the ones that are best drilled, the best trained. Who's training them? Captain Parker and several of the other officers, all who had fought in the French-Indian War. Captain Parker was in the Second Siege of Louisbourg. Captain Parker fought in the plains of Abraham against the French at Quebec in the fall of 1759. How many of you have ever lived in a place served by a volunteer fire? Didn't they just suck? I was a volunteer fireman, and I'll be honest with you, the amount of training drills we did, because we were actually servicing our neighbors, was intense, and we were damn good and proud of it. Very competitive with a company from the next community, like those rascals in Percival, or the ones over the river in Brunswick, or over in Carroll Manor down by the Point of Rocks. We competed with all of them, like that's what long list company is like. They do not want to embarrass themselves. Why are they there? They are there to protect Native Americans early on, the French in all those wars with the French for them, and now the British, apparently. And so they have been drilling twice a week. And some of the companies have had the luxury of live fire practice. Okay? So if you think about it, the embattled farmers are not a bunch of nitwits that must be volunteer firemen. They could be a bit yahooish at times, but you don't have to be a professional to be good at what you do and to have the hiccup, the get up and go to do it. And so there they are in the gloom, the sun coming up as they face east towards Boston, mustering in on their standard parade ground where they have drilled every Wednesday and every Saturday, as long as anyone can remember. At least it's been 6 months. And there, down the road, is Lieutenant Colonel Smith. Remember the slide that early on said you could hear alarm guns and bells ringing, and even people firing muskets in the air. An occasional pot shot, evidently, although it didn't hit anybody, was being fired at these British troops. How many of these British troops actually were there? Our guesstimates vary, anywhere between 700 to 1,000. But as a workable number, we long ago went away from 800 towards 700. Now we're right back at 800. Historians constantly checking each other. So think of 800. What they were was a mix of light infantry. That was a new concept invented by General Thomas Gage, the Governor General of Massachusetts during the French-Indian War. They were supposed to be the ones that could quickly run to wherever you needed them. Okay, think of them as a mobile force. In other words, they're light guys, well trained to be able to run. And they might be running to the fore, they might be running to the rear, they may be setting out as flankers as they're called marches. But what they did is, of those regiments, they grabbed all the light infantry companies. They also grabbed the biggest, burliest, nastiest guys, what the Germans in World War I used to call shock troops. Right? Kind of a punch through, and they're called grenadiers. There was a time in which grenadiers used to actually hurl rudimentary grenades. By the time of the American Revolution, that had proved not to be very effective. They were still called grenadiers. They were huge, big, tall guys, averaging 5'10", 6 feet, that kind of thing. They had big bearskin helmets. The light infantry had these proud leather helmets. The men of the line just wore Cortez trucker hats, as it were. But at any rate, that's what he's got out there. 800 of them. And what he decides to do, hearing all that he's hearing,
stops shy of Lexington Green and gives orders that some of the companies are gonna be detached, 6 of them, and they're all light infantry companies. And they're going to essentially run ahead because their job is to get to Concord and to search for those weapons, and particularly for 4 bronze cannons, which seems to be something General Gage is obsessed by. And it is gonna be crucial that they secure bridges on the way into Concord. And so they're gonna get ahead of everybody else. They're going to be the ones that are gonna arrive first at Lexington Green. They are headed by the second in command of this expedition. He's a Royal Marine from Paisley, Scotland, son of a Presbyterian minister. His name is John Pitcairn. He's a careerist. He was there during the French Indian War. And Pitcairn also has a fiery temper and has come to despise Americans. Yes. Well, Pitcairn is going to be leading this advance guard. With him, just a quick aside, you've probably heard that Paul Revere never actually made it to Concord because he was captured by a British patrol. You ever heard that? This was a patrol of like 20 guys that were broken up into several lots to guard all the roads so alarmed riders couldn't get out. And that's what Revere ran into. He eventually was let go. But those guys had ridden back to join the expedition. They were all mounted, there were 8 of them. And they were all worked up because they'd heard all these rolling drums and bells clanging, and even heard, as they had ridden back towards Lexington, a discharge, a volley discharge. Evidently, that was well early in the morning. It was from the minute they were going into Buckman Tavern. Buckman didn't want everybody standing around the tavern with loaded guns, so they all fired out their power and then went into the tavern. These guys are worked up. So if you look at 8 worked up officers, a really hot-blooded Scottish Royal Marine, and then these guys have been cooped up in Boston. That's our situation. And the light is still dim. It's about 10:05 in the morning, and the order goes out from Pitcairn. Prime and load. I want to say they're going to have fixed bayonets. So these guys are moving towards Lexington. Rumors have hit them from this patrol of riders that captured Revere that evidently there were nearly 500 militiamen standing on Lexington Green. They have no idea. And so they move forward. All right, this is an aerial view. They did not have this. Right? We are looking with Boston at our backs. Okay? If you look at this, that's Lexington Common in the top center. There are 2 roads that form Lexington Common and a little lane at the back of it where today there's a big steeple church, but that wasn't there. Okay? One road to the right goes towards Bedford and on to New Hampshire. Down that road a little bit is the parsonage where Hancock and Adams had been, but they probably left them. The road on the left goes to Concord, which is where the British are going. And right in the middle of this intersection is a meeting house, 3 stories high. It is a church, but because it is not the Church of England, just as in Virginia, churches that were not Church of England could not have what? Steeples. And so it has no steeple. That's why it had this separate alarm bell, which would have been off to the side of the meeting house. The British arrived, and this is where things go sour almost immediately. And this is what historians have been trying to figure. That meeting house was not small. Think of it at least as big as what we've got here, with balconies and the like. It was simple, it was not small. The British troops find that there are colonial militiamen standing on the green behind the meeting house. I would suggest that they had probably formed right about where that 180-foot flagpole is today. I think that's why we put it there, to be honest. I'm trying to remember when it was put in. But they're doing a routine parade and they are conferring what to do.
And these British are marching toward this and see a few of them off to the side. In other words, still hanging out from where the meeting house is blocking the view. And it was unclear how many there were. What Pitcairn faced was a nasty situation. He was a Marine. These guys are Army. Why did he tell you? He also had 6 companies he had never worked with who didn't know him. He spoke Scottish. So everything he said you could barely understand as you're from England or Wales. And therefore, he's leading them. He's also not right in front. So think of these 200 or so men, and he's a third of the way back. Did you ever try to lead when people start to go in front of you, and they start to go just where you don't want them to go? That's happened to me over the years. That's exactly what they did. Which way are they supposed to go? Left at the meeting house and on down the road to Concord. Where do these first ones go? They can see some Minutemen hanging out the right side of the meeting house, and they start to go right. There's Captain Parker. His men are in parade formation. They're not in combat formation, and he has to suddenly figure out what to do. One of the men supposedly yelled something to the effect, "There's something to do." And what Parker did is he moves his men, and they start stepping back, walking backwards, and they move from where the red arrow is to where the blue arrow is. 2/3 of the way down the common along the Bedford Road. Why? And there's the question that historians have to wrestle. Why did they do that? And the answer is a really good one. If you think about it, you can reason that. Who was down the Bedford Road maybe? Adams and Hancock. Have they gotten out of there? Well, just so you know, it was a small aside. Paul Revere was let go by the British patrol, and he was sent by Adams and Hancock to come up to the green, where a truck had been parked in Commodious Tavern that had all the papers of the Continental Congress, the Provincial Congress, the illegal government of Massachusetts. And he got it, sends Revere and another man up to go get the trunk, who are coming out the back door of Buckland Tavern, have to walk through this conglomeration of 70 or so Minutemen, and then race up the road to Bedford, the right-hand road. So what would you conclude if you were Captain Parker? Hancock and Adams gone like we told them 2 hours ago? Or are they still lollygagging? And they might be up there. And the rumor has been that the British are actually after them, as well as maybe Hancock. And so you see them fall back along the Bedford Road. Second thing, what are their standing orders? Do not fire first. Their standing orders from the Provincial Congress are to show up every single time we call you to do it. Lexington believed it had to show up to Lexington. It had no orders from their regimental commander to show up anywhere else, like on Concord. No, they didn't have that. So what they do is they show up there, the British are going to come through, they pull off to the side. Why? Maybe to guard Adams and Hancock, but it might be as simple as that's their standing orders. What should they do? Watch, darn it, and pass the word on as soon as you can after the British pass through. So what's going to happen when parts, 3 companies, that's about 100 men, start going to the right of the meeting house and right at them? And they are primed and loaded and have on what on the end of their muskets? Bayonets. Wow. So the Minutemen are all looking at each other now, and then racing out in front. From around the left side of the meeting house comes Pitcairn with his gaggle of mounted officers to patrol, and I'll start trying to get out in front of the men and control their men. And there were a mix of orders, apparently, something to the effect of don't fire. But they try to get out in front of their own men, and of course they've got their sabers drawn,
One had a pistol, and they're moving towards the Minutemen, and they're getting yelled at. Disperse, you damn rascals, ye scoundrels. And different officers yelling different things. As one historian put it, you just ordered these men to disperse, which is against their thing. And then you're riding around as if to capture them. What would you do as a Minuteman? What Captain Parker did, like a volunteer fire captain elected, he tells his men, disperse, get out of here. And a few of them start to back off. Few of them head across the road with a stone wall. Ooh, do the British misinterpret that? They're very afraid of Yankee sharpshooters, and the war hasn't even started yet. But I've heard all kinds of rumors about that. And so our British troops are in an interesting situation, as are the Minutemen. This is a picture that was drawn in May 1775 by the Minutemen, aims to come up from Connecticut to join the siege of Boston that results after Lexington conquer. Take a look at that. You'll see the tavern on the left. We're looking towards Boston. There's the meeting house. You'll notice that most of the British troops are marching as they were supposed to, and they're marching to the Concord Road and on. And you'll see these three companies that come around between the tavern, around the other side of the meeting house, and are starting to move towards these Minutemen, who were in rough parade formation, although a little disorganized because they backed up already once, and now they have been ordered to disperse. Who fired the first shot? You probably know by now, as I think every American child learns, nobody knows. There are two theories that I think hold the most credence. Theory number one, it used to be blamed on. You think a Royal Marines got screwed up with that? I don't think so. But you know who I guess would do? A hot-blooded guy who had the running and calling gear. Let me just show you how Major Mitchell was. They had been along the road between Lexington and Concord. It's about 1 o'clock in the morning, and a guy came out seeing them, who was a Minuteman from Lee. That's the next town. House right beside the road, and he came and asked them, "Are they out? Are the regulars out?" And Major Mitchell went right for him, drew his saber, and whammed him on the head for asking the question. Well, the guy ran inside, bleeding like a stuck pig. His wife bandaged him up, and he ran off on a back road and was one of the ones that wore not only the Bedford Company, but the Concord Company. But that's Major Mitchell for you. That kind of a hot-tempered guy. I think he fired his pistol, not right at anyone, but maybe sort of over the heads to emphasize the point, disperse, disperse. Or it was a spectator. Or more likely, one of the Minutemen who hadn't quite arrived on time because they got a little bit too far from the green. They hit a long drum roll and quickly respond, and they're firing alarm guns in you. One way or another. What is clear is that almost immediately after that first shot, both sides agreed with the British volley into the Minutemen. And the Minutemen are partly turning back, partly a few of them still holding their ground, quite sure what to do despite the order to disperse. And that's why you see this picture. That's the way it comes out. It's still, we are pretty sure, the most accurate picture we have. Did the Minutemen return fire? Well, most of them ran like hell. And there was two lights you could run all the way to the back of it. Two houses there. To the left of these barns by the tavern, there was a stone wall. Some of them ran for that, for cover. A few of them ran all the way off the common behind Ethan and Rose house, which is on the far side of the Concord. But the one thing we know, as we look at this picture, is it's a massacre. Those first few volleys are followed up by the British charging after the Minutemen. And there were two gaggles of spectators, one over by the tavern, one beyond the belfry. And they start charging after them. People are racing, they're charging at the houses. They're charging and jumping over stone walls. They keep firing and firing. We've always been led to believe this was 2-3 minutes long, more like 10. And when done, on the common are lots of groaning people. 8 dead Minutemen, 4 alarmists, 9 badly wounded. And
So we see, what do we make of this? It is a massacre. Captain Parker said, we dispersed, we pulled back, we went to the far side of the commons so as not to be in their way. And this is what we have done numerous times for the British on the march. We formed and let them see us. We didn't fire any shots, and you opened fire on us. You massacred us. No one expected this. Who's the most horrified? Who's the next most horrified? His boss shows up in a few minutes with the other 600 troops. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Smith, Army. It took Smith quite a bit of drama to beat the long rules of the British Army gathered back then. It took them 30 minutes to get reorganized on Lexington Green because the guys had gone crazy. They had gone crazy. So, Hitler is going to be blamed. Didn't then fight back. Yes, we can at least 8 in their testimonies taken after the fight at Parliament. But again, they didn't expect to have to fight here. It just wasn't anticipated. This is the reenactment for the 225 back April 19th, 2000. And they do it every year and have many movies still doing it next Saturday on the anniversary. And lots of people standing there, which you can see gun smoke is covering the green, and British bayonets are running, they're scaring the hell out of the tourists. But that's fine. Grenadiers or light infantry? Light infantry. You see them chasing after houses and the like. And Lieutenant Colonel Smith finally gets a when he finally gets everybody back into rank in order to continue the march to Concord, what he does this time is to order a massive volley, 800 muskets. Why do you do that? A, morale of the soldiers. B, I don't want them carrying loaded guns over Concord after they so screw this. But Americans heard that. A volley of cheers, followed by huzzah, 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 thundering huzzah from nearly 1,000 voices. And then off they march to Concord. Sam Adams had left with John Hancock. John Hancock wanted to stay in front. And they were maybe a mile and a quarter away. They heard those first volleys. And although the conversations have been garbled, how it's translated through by historians is that Sam Adams said, "Oh, what a fine day," and Hancock was all perturbed because everything had gone wrong that day as far as he was concerned. And Adams then says, "No, what a glorious morning for America." The first volley, what a glorious morning for America. Lexington today, that's the town seal. The high school auditorium, Fort High, brass letters, "Oh, the glorious morning for America." Most people don't know who said it, when, what references. But that first volley that took down so many men and then came a massacre. "Oh, the glorious morning for America." I'll leave this little segment. The other segments are drastically shorter, but that's what you came to hear. Jonathan Harrington's house, his wife standing on the doorstep watching him. She saw him take a 75 caliber ball in the chest. And he somehow, God knows how, managed to crawl across the green to the doorstep. She grabbed him up in her arms and that's it. 28 years old. If you're a Lexington kid,
The dare is that stone step is the original, and then it's bloodstained. And I didn't know a kid, at least in my voice section, who had at some point, not a quick, but to Jonathan Harrington's house, and touched the stone and then ran off like a. I grew up in Lexington. I was conceived in this house. If you stand on the front porch there and look at it, look dead at the Minuteman statue. The Minuteman statue stands, it's what we had in the title slide at the beginning, stands right where the meeting house was. For the magic decision of the British was made to go 2 ways instead of 1. My dad, who's the band director, and Lexington High School band at that time, I was a proud member later, but back in 1950, they had tricorn hats. This is 2013, they still have tricorn hats, fortunately, they've got new ones. But at any rate, that's me watching and thinking, wow. My dad was come back from the Memorial Day parade. Lexington loves a parade, Veterans Day, Memorial Day, Patriots Day, they have parades for everything. The band always marches, so you learn to march really, really well. And I can tell you that he came back after the Memorial Day parade, and the family legend is that I was conceived in celebration of the great moment. In the leaders, up there on the 3rd floor, overlooking the Minuteman statue. Sister says that's so much alone and tries to count the months, and so does my wife. But at any rate, there's me a little bit later in a new house, about 1.5 miles from promenade, the one in my mother's lap there, with my older sister, who will eventually be my mentor and get me into the most important thing, because by the time I reached high school, I'd marched in a zillion parades. I'd gone past Lexington Common on my bike or walking so many times I can't tell you. And that's what I looked like by the time I took a test to become an official Lexington guide. My sister had done it the year before. I wanted to do it. The guy was 107 that tested us. We were absolutely convinced that he'd been there on Lexington Green. Mr. Gary, and we therefore better know our stuff. And so I got my official Lexington guide badge that's somewhere at the bottom of my pocket. I think I have, I'll probably stick my finger by accident into the pin. Here it is, yes, from many years ago. Since you had to go solicit customers in Lexington Green, you better be doing what you did. There's my diary from 1967. You can disregard things like fool around on some of the days. I'm not going to go into what I did. But down there on Saturday, there is a guide first day, my first day in the history field back in 1967. And me standing by the bench across from Buckman Tavern on Lexington Green, behind the Minuteman statue, just up to the right. And that's 40 years to the day after my first day guiding. So that's several years ago. But anyway, you get to sit on the bench, approach customers, and then say, this is the most gutsy thing ever. Pay us what it's worth. And I found in the first tours, I got twice the going rate and realized, my big debate was whether or not I would skip high school graduation 3 years into being a guide to give a guided tour of Lexington to this particular gentleman, who is the 9th Earl of Dartmouth, as in the direct descendant of Lord Dartmouth gave the order to General Gage. Yeah, I went to high school graduation. I would like to, this. Eventually, I got a promotion. I got to cross the street and work for Lexington Historical Society at Potterfield, which was great fun. It's a magnificent building to take people around. And I remember that the lady who was in charge at the time was like 75, weighed about
275, constantly knitted and scowled at me because I was the youngest person, 18, who'd ever worked there. I think to be a guy there traditionally, you had to be about 75, 80 years old. At any rate, emerging Rev War people back in the 60s. But that was great fun. And I also got to work for Hancock and Clark that stayed. That was a magnificent story. We had a little museum out back, and you could touch things like hair from John Hancock, hair from Jonas Clark. Little cool things that were the old kind of museum. Museum had been established in 1886 and hadn't been ruined by modern rock. Well, after that, I went to college, and even in college, I came home summers to work. The college had been married, brought me down. I'm thinking, if somebody loves Rev War history, this is the place to go. It turned out to be good, with Colonial Williamsburg right next door. Eventually, when I finished that, my first job afterwards was, even before I got my job teaching at Loudoun County Store in Jamestown. And I was one of the corps de garde, one of those 1607 folks. That's me and all doing that. And when I moved out here to take my history teaching job in a county named appropriately for a British officer, I got a job at Harvard Children's History for summers. Obviously, as a history teacher, historic sites being as important as they are, we spent a lot of time doing historic sites on field trips, either in class or more commonly on weekends. This is us at Gettysburg, having just reenacted Pickett's charge as a Confederate unit. My great-grandfather was a Yankee soldier, so I definitely had to make the crossover to do that. And a program. We put in a Civil War trail sign before I left Loudon Valley High School where I taught. And this is me with my students on a 5-day excursion to New England. And this is me back at Buckner Tavern in the tap room where the Minutemen waited with a bunch of Loudon County students, feeling the thing. I've just asked them there to feel the floor. I like to touch it. And then eventually I finished up with that. The 12 officers decided that they needed to give me a going away present, which they did. And my fellow teachers gave me a going away present as well, Chelsea, which I went to graduation to. And then I ended up doing the same kind of thing, but working in elementary, middle, and high schools, giving programs on local history, like the one I'm doing now. And got to be the executive director for the Jane Piedmont Heritage Area before I finally retired. That's me on the last day of being an official employee of anybody. And now I do what you see here. That's Mike on the left and me on the right leading the German 7th class, which I hope some of you, if you haven't taken it, will consider it. Great fun. Ask me questions afterwards, and let's go. Oh, because we call this the lesson to learn. First thing is, in the meeting house, just minutes after the British leave, people are beginning to pull the bodies from Lexington Green, women and children, and Minutemen. And this is what the meeting house looks simple. That's one in Maine, it's the same basic model. Reverend John Clark was the chaplain of the Minutemen as well as the local, absolutely son of Reverend. His wife is a relative of John Hay. And he was going to give the funeral oration, just, hours after these men had been shot down in the first major action. And good night, I would love to hear that oration. One thing we know, they go out and bury the Minutemen in a place slightly apart from the local graveyard, which is just off the common, it's still there. This is the marker where they show you where they built. They buried them that day. They were afraid these people would be taken by the British on their march back and hung upside down or heads on a pike, that kind of thing, to being rebels. That's the way the British were seen by Americans at that particular point. But what Captain Parker does, while they are doing that, he musters his men back in on the common. And by now, all the ones who didn't show up earlier, but had originally shown up, 140 of them are there. And they're put in line of march. Captain Parker knows one thing. After the horror of the funeral oration and the rousing sentiment for patriotism given by Chaplain Parker, what did these men want to do? You do not want resistance. And so they march on the road to Concord. Tellingly, they stop just shy of the next town line because they don't have orders from the regimental commander to go any further. But near that next town line, the Lexington town line, there is an interesting formation. Or actually, just a quick thing. This is an aside that I found out this morning. Two facts of it. You know the White Hart God is the anthem of any of you? Bonnie Prince Charlie, the Jacobite uprising, 1745-46. And New England nobody supported the Catholic Scots. They were virulent Protestants, shall we say. But it's interesting. What did Captain Parker instruct his fifer and drummer to play as they marched from Lexington Green on the road to Concord? The white cockade. The sign of revelry. And they got to this place, they were running to be in sure position, only to have to wait for quite a long time. This is it. Okay, this is along the road from Lexington to Concord. It's still there. Power wires over it. But this was kind of put in before Minuteman National Park could stop all that. Eventually, these wires have been moved. But this is called Fist Bluff by some, or just the bluff. Some people call it Parker's Revenge. On this cliff, they put 140 men and got them in position that they could not be seen. From this cliff, they're facing the road. The British had marched to Concord. They got there about 8 in the morning. This is Concord. This is Doolittle's print of that. You can see the officers up in the cemetery overlooking the town common. And some of those men were marched up to guard the bridgeheads, as you would expect. You probably know that this is one of them. They call it the Old North Bridge on the Concord River. And they will guard this. And some of their men will go beyond. A rumor has, and it's an accurate rumor passed on by loyalists who knew, that the colonel of the Minutemen from Concord had a farm about 1.5 miles beyond here, where they had hidden many of the supplies that evidently didn't turn up in Concord because of the warnings and the like. They moved theirs. And so they will march on to that, but several companies will stay here to guard the bridge. Meanwhile, Minutemen are going to form on a hill. They had watched the British march in. Indeed, one group of Minutemen had turned around and led the British into Concord, fifing and drumming as they went. So you can imagine this weirdness. Minutemen leading the British in, and the Minutemen kind of obscure. While the British are there scouting about the common, and what the Minutemen do is they go up that North Bridge to stand on the hill, and they wait. And eventually they see the British companies coming to guard the bridge and go on to Colonel Barris, and they watch, and the numbers keep coming and coming until there are at least 450 up on this hill overlooking the North Bridge. And finally, the British are doing what they're supposed to do, searching for supplies in Concord, and they start to light some of the supplies on fire. Smoke is seen from this hill in Concord up to your right. And one of the men yells, "Will you let them burn the town?" And there's this huzzah, and the Minutemen are completely corralled, but they begin marching towards the bridge. And I think you know that. Two play with them, okay. Not that interesting. And they had placed in the front of that march Abner Davis's men, the Acton Company.
he had built a shooting range behind his farmhouse for live fire practice, and done it twice a week. And when they moved towards the bridge and the British begin to back off on the Concord side of the bridge, and a shot rings out from one of the British soldiers and let loose, and then the British volley into that front rank. Isaac Davis's men will be the ones who return fire. And what a good number of the British soldiers, all casualties being. I find it interesting that Isaac Davis was hit by that first British volley, the chest and killed. He was leaving his wife with 2 kids who were desperately ill that morning when they had responded to the alarm, and now he's dead as a Minuteman captain. The British will now march back to Concord, and eventually all of the men who had gone searching for supplies are all gathered into Concord, and at about noon, having not found what they wanted, in particular not finding 4 bronze cannons that somehow have been snuck by patriots out of Boston, these folks will leave. And the Minutemen will follow them, not on the road this time. There's a ridge that follows the road out of Concord. It's about 80-foot high, narrow ridge, geological formation, and they will march across that. And about a mile out of town, they will hit this farmhouse, which has a little tiny bridge in front of it. And what the British did is they noticed these men following them, and the last British crossed the little bridge in front of Miriam's farmhouse here, turned and fired a volley at those pursuing them. That's when all hell breaks loose. The Minutemen are all over the place. I don't think they had any idea how many men had been put into place along the sides of the road going from Concord back to Lexington. Interesting. The most bloody place on that road is called Bloody Angle to this day. 200 men from the neighboring town of Woburn had marched into Lexington just after the British left. They saw the bodies being brought into the meeting house for that funeral oration. They knew what the Lexington alarm was. And they are going to be at a corner on the road back from Concord to Lexington. Living daylights out of the British troops. The Bloody Angle. It's a national park site today. Doing the best they can. And then they arrive. And Parker's revenge. The cliff with the Minutemen on it have been waiting, and now the British are going to have their second torn to head moment. They call it Parker's revenge. The Park Service has made a big deal out of digging up archaeological sites, and sure to tell us that that's Parker's revenge. Parker's revenge, you have to have the cliff, because that's where the Minutemen were, shooting down on the road where it made a dual turn. Parker's revenge. The British doing the best to get back to Lexington. At Lexington, 1,000 troops were waiting for them from Boston and the Earl person. They'd been sent out to assist because obviously word had gone back that things weren't going well. They took these embattled British troops as they came back into Lexington. They even had artillery with them. They let loose couple of rounds of artillery. One ball went right through the Lexington meeting house as the British troops were passing by. But here at Monroe's Tavern, they were given the big break. This was the refreshment break. And almost every room in that tavern was taken over for the wounded, and they drank the tavern dry. All on the front lawn of Monroe's Tavern, still there. Still visited, were exhausted British soldiers just lying there trying to catch their breath. They had been marching since about 9 o'clock the previous night. Here it is 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. When they finally get going at 3:30 in the afternoon from there, I can tell you that it will be a nasty fight.
all the way back to Boston. A few things you need to know. This thing at Lexington, this glorious morning for America, is taking instant advantage of patriot leaders. Dr. Joseph Warren, who was leading the command that day in Boston, immediately got to work on it. What they will do is organize the Minutemen into reporting parties. They will go before justices of the peace and formally report what they saw. And this can be collected and sent to Parliament. I can tell you that a broadside was quickly put together, bloody butchery of the British troops, and sent by post right down the road. It arrived here in Leesburg just about 9 days later. It arrived in Alexandria, then up the road from Alexandria. Mrs. McCabe's Ordinary, which is in Leesburg. It fronts Loud Street and around the back of it, so like the back better. That's when the first news arrived here, and our militia almost immediately began to muster in. We divided our militia too. We had the militia and the independent militia, which was better trained, and they began to get ready for this and drilled on the front lawn of the courthouse with the arrow points. But I find it fascinating. Go up and down the coast, and you'll see these tombstones. Lexington Alarm. Lexington Alarm. Lexington Alarm. Lexington Alarm. And these are not from Massachusetts. Lexington Alarm. Was the moment that lit off America. The siege of Boston, as you know, eventually had thousands and thousands of militia and Minutemen gathered, organized in June into an army under Colonel George Washington. I will just say we learned a few things, and my talk reflects that. Let me just touch on the key points I'd like you to take away. Number one, committees of correspondence were established in 1772-73. They were designed to pass on the latest news and the latest thinking from city to city, town to town, within a state and between states. It was Ben Franklin's creation of a postal rider system that allowed that to happen. Hurrah for it. Two, Boston wasn't the most radical place around it. You know who was also radical? Just about every town in Massachusetts inland from Boston. And Lexington, once Boston was occupied, Lexington went nuts. There's a tea version of Lexington Green well before the 19th of April, 1775. In Stockbridge, Massachusetts, the first county convention in Massachusetts was held to protest what was going on in Boston. The new Massachusetts Government Act forbid town meetings not allowed by the governor, and so what they did is they had county meetings instead. This one met in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, the Norman Rockwell town, and was held in the widow of Bingham's tavern. Here's one of those meetings. Actually, that's Tracy. Another order of drink. I'm sure it was crazy. I'm sure rebels took all of the arms, cannon, and weapons that they could from this coastal royal fort, Fort William and Mary. And this was the middle of December 74. Virginia was crazy. It was Cresswell, our famous observer, sees Loudon's militia drilling, and it's a new illegal independent company drilling on the courthouse lawn in December, about the same time as this going on. It isn't just Boston, my friends. I probably already told you this, but keep in mind how organized they have made these minute companies, alarm lists, and so forth, and how much they've been drilling. So they're not a bunch of disorganized, invalid farmers at all. Virginia would be the key to this. New England, you had every New England state on board. If we're talking all the way up to Penobscot Bay in the Massachusetts District of Maine section, all the way down to New York City and Connecticut. they're organized. But it's Virginia that has to be the ones that put us over. Fortuitously, Second Virginia Convention, in other words, our House of Burgesses, we don't have anymore because the governor has not called it. We meet illegally as a Virginia Convention. That's what Massachusetts called the Provincial Congress. They will have their famous meeting in St. John's Church on the 23rd of March. Patrick Henry will propose that Virginia prepare to arm itself. This had already gone on in several states, but Virginia was the biggest, most famous state, and if it would vote for it, Patrick Henry's speech, you know, give me the liberty of giving speech. That speech is an amazing speech. And we reenacted that a couple weeks ago. But when Patrick Henry manages to win that vote by a simple 6-vote margin, Virginia is in the running. It happens that as the news was arriving from Alexandria of what had happened at Lexington and Concord, the news was also arriving that St. John's, Patrick Henry, that the royal governor of Virginia was Dunmore and ordered the Commonwealth's Power magazine to be seized. Royal Marines marched in, took it out like dead of night. What happened? 3,000 people gathered at Fredericksburg in response and ready to march to Williamsburg to do something about it. In other words, we too are ready. Is Rodman? Yes, we were. Absolutely. The further west you went in Virginia, the more radical people. Loudon would have been press. And that's what gunpowder looks like. Those that have peace, that's what the British Royal Marines were. And my last lesson is who is behind the nasty orders going to Lord North and then on to the Secretary of State, George III. Yes, it was absolutely sure the Parliament, the majority in Parliament, was fully backing these policies, wherever they emanated from. George III, he wanted Massachusetts flattened. He kept suggesting that they ought to burn it town by town. So yes, if you think he was a good guy in one line, do your first reading, you'll be quickly changed. Oh, and the final thing I guess I should say is that it didn't happen at last. It's going to happen. We nearly had an explosion as early as September 1774 when British troops out of Boston took powder from Middlesex County Magazine that was outside of Cambridge. And 10,000 men gathered within 24 hours at Cambridge, armed. That's September. It's all patriot leaders could do to keep them calm. And the British had marched to seize cannon that evidently had ended up in Salem to be hidden, the port up the coast. And they were supposed to do it by secret, and they get there, and there was a bridge they had to cross, and the bridge has been raised, and a bunch of rebels on the other side refused to lower the bridge. They're threatened with firing. That's February 26, 2 months before it was inclined. In the end, patriots let the bridge fall, let them march over 200 yards, turn around and go back so that they could say that they looked for the cannon and didn't find it. They moved once again. And finally, Lexington allowed. This is my last video. This monument on Lexington Green is the oldest Revolutionary War monument. It was erected at the end of the 18th century, 1799. Today, the bodies of those 8 men are buried beneath it. You know where they were at that time. But there's a line on this monument that I am very fond of, and they are a line that was given by Reverend Jones Clark, and he gave that funeral oration, and this is from an oration he gave in 1798. But you'll notice my arrows point to it. They nobly dared to be free. What a great way of putting it. In Loudon, we have a monument in our courthouse. It shows not only a farmer going away, militia possibly joining the Continentals, but also his wife who will have to run that farm because we're the breadbasket for Washington's army, and his son who will be equally involved. and they nobly dared to be free. There's one tombstone in Loudon that I'll leave you with, and that's this of Captain Isaiah Marks, who joined in the Continental Army. His father was a Baptist preacher here, and his father was rabidly pro-patriot. And I will say that when Isaiah signed up in '76, he almost didn't make it home. He was badly wounded in the Battle of Monmouth Courthouse in New Jersey in June of 1778, but he managed to heal, stayed with Washington's army until it was broken up in the late fall of 1784. And he walked home, and he got here 2 months later, he was dead. That's what it means. Thank you. Our tradition is to pass the hat to give a donation to the church since they let us use it. And after that, I'll be happy to take questions for a minute or two. But I know I've gone on a bit, and if you need to leave, please do. But if you have questions, stay around, and I'll take them publicly for a little bit, and then you can talk with me individually. Let's pass that hat. Actually, while that's going around now, if you would like to ask a question, I would be happy to obfuscate the truth. So, yes, sir.
Is the guy program still on?
Yes,
Excellent.
yes. They have costumes now. All we wore was a tricorn hat, shirt and tie. Now they have better outfits. Yes, yes, sir.
Were they using just smooth bore muskets on both sides?
Yes.
And
Rifle. Typical Minutemen would have been armed with a smooth bore, 69 or 75 caliber. Those are hundredths of an inch, right? 0.75 caliber means 3/4 of an inch. It's a huge and heavy ball. Most Minutemen also had with them a tomahawk for close hand-to-hand combat. Some of them had bayonets, some of them did not. There were orders to have them made, but they were not fully up to stuff of that. Anybody who's in the alarm list within them was fully outfitted with a tomahawk and, of course, smooth bore musket. The British had the same. Officers had pistols and sabers. Yes.
Two questions. From where were the Minutemen getting their gunpowder? And also, I didn't catch what happened when the British got to
Good questions. It was a huge deal in the 6 months or so before Lexington to get enough gunpowder. They were getting it illegally from anybody who would across the ocean sell it. They were getting it from anybody who could manufacture it. And to get enough powder was big. Obviously, that the seizing of the powder and Cambridge, the seizing of the powder was a huge reaction. Great shortage of gunpowder, so terribly important. And they're getting it where they could. Well, the Minutemen get enough muskets. Oftentimes, you see a farmer go in with a disillusioned British soldier say, "Look, I'll give you a few pounds if you give me your musket." Then he'd sneak it in his wagon back. So there was all kinds of stuff going on in order to get weapons. It was quite a market, just like there is today. The second part of the question, at Concord, they found probably the least valuable things: some tents, some flour, some musket balls and cartridges. They did not find any valuable artillery. They found some very old artillery that was not mounted with a carriage in the fields. But they were really looking for, to keep General Gage happy, was 4 guns, cannons stolen from Boston Common, where they even has an amazing story of how they snuck out of the Patriots. But those had been figured as well. So the most valuable stuff was gone.
The weapons had been thrown under the fields of Colonel Barrett, but almost 2 miles from Concord Center. The British didn't quite catch on to that. People did an amazing job when there was something valuable in their house about lying. Oh, that's my grandmother. And she's dying. Please don't hurt her. The British troops had been ordered from General Gage not to molest the civilians or to leave their homes or burn them. You know, while they were at Monroe's Tavern in Lexington, when Earl Percy came to meet them, they were taking that long rest, they burned 6 houses, totally looted those houses before they did. And from there all the way back to Boston, where we burned it. Which of course the bloody butchery of the British troops, partly in reference to that as well as to the battalions. Battalions wise, just as an aside, the British will lose 73 men that day, and 174 of them will be wounded. 26 will be missing, which probably means captured or deserted. On the Minutemen side, 49 killed and 41 wounded. The fighting after Lexington will be particularly bitter. In the town just east of Boston, from Western Monotony, Arlington today, absolute bloodbath at one house. 12 men will be shot down. Minutemen from places like Salem and Danvers, which was Salem Village, will be back. I'm shocked at how far some of these men had jogged to be part of that firing of the British in the line. Any other questions? Yes.
Presumably there were at least some loyalists, or was this entirely
Yes.
in the country?
Yeah.
Did they play any kind of role, or did they just stuck their heads in it?
I would say there were fewer loyalists, and it is terribly popular for the bicentennial on to give huge credence to that. And it's much more true in some places. If you go to New England, there was one town in Massachusetts that was so notoriously loyalist that they sent British units out to protect it. But it was sort of south of Boston along the coast of Marshfield, Massachusetts. Most loyalists by April of '75 were in Boston, where they'd gone, to avoid being turned federal.
Okay.
Yeah, so there were some, not that, but there were loyalists joining up in the forces, not quite like we'll see further. So. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Talking about the cannon, do they ever use, and what's that happen?
Good question. They were brought to a little town of Stowe, sort of southwest of Concord. They will be used. They were not large cannons. They were 3 pounders and 4 pounders, 2 of each. They will be used during the war. Right now, one of those has a plate on it. It's called the Hancock. The other is called the Adams, and 2 of them British managed to capture. The Hancock is the visitor center of the National Historical Park. Let's see. All right. Yes. Anybody else? Thank you so much. Have a